Hello, ladies and gents. I'm Justin Johnson. I'm on my last year of my academics of arts and humanities. I want to make this year a bit more engaging with my listeners, people that come by and listen in. I want to engage with them. I left some questions and answers, a poll for people to engage with what I'm doing. Maybe you can better oneself. I'm not saying I'm better than the next person, but give you a bit of an idea of what we need to do to better at prosperity. Maybe I'll give you guidance. Maybe I'll give you a bit of guidance. But engaging is very important, isn't it? So I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. How to broaden your horizon. I've got a severe head injury, but let me tell you something. I don't give up. It's staying methodical practice that keeps me occupied, keeps me going. And I've got a very creative mind. If anyone's read any of my books, my creative mind is something phenomenal considering. But anyway, ladies and gents, welcome to my everyday study. Stay methodical with study, or can we get by doing it sporadic? You tell me. That's your answer. The poll's open for you to answer yes or no. So yeah, in my third year, we're on the module A328. How did empires begin? Asian land empires, the Ottomans and Mughals. Confined to Malay and the Eastern Island, China is too strong for Europe under the Mingers and the early Manchus, who came in the middle of the 17th century. Japan actually goes so far as to turn out every foreigner and shut herself up completely in 1641. And in India, our story has lagged behind in India, and we must fill up the gap, as we shall see. India rose to be a powerful monarchy under the new Mughal destiny, and there was little danger or chance of European invasion, but Europe was ready to dominate on the seas. So we come back to India. In Europe and China and Japan and Malaysia, we have reached the end of the 17th century and we are on the verge of the 18th. But in India, we are still in the early 16th when Babar came. Babar's victory over the feeble and contemptible Afghan Sultan of Delhi in 1526. This begins a new epoch and a new empire in India. The Mongol Empire with a brief interval. It lasted from 1526 to 1707, a period of 181 years. These were the years of its power and glory, when the fame of the great Mughal in India spread all over Asia and Europe. There were six big rulers of this destiny, and then the empire went to pieces, and the Marathas, the Sikhs, and others carved out states from it. And after them come the British, who profiting by the breakdown of the central power and the confusions in the country. This had gradually established their dominion. I have told you something of Babar already, descended from Genghis. Genghis and Tamerlane. He had something of their greatness and military ability, but the Mongols have become more civilized since the days of Genghis, and Babar was one of the most cultured and delightful persons one could meet. There was no sectarianism in him, no religious bigotry, and he did not destroy as his ancestors used to do. He was devoted to art and literature, and was himself a poet in Persian flowers and gardens he loved. In the heat of India, he thought often of this home in Central Asia. The violets are lovely in Fergana, he says in his memoirs. It is a mass of tulips and roses. Barbers was only a boy of 11 when his father died and he became ruler of Samarkand. It was not a soft job. There were enemies all around him. So, at an age when little boys and girls are at school, he had to take the field with his sword. He lost his throne and won it back, and had many a great adventure in his stormy career. And yet, he managed to cultivate literature, poetry, and art. Ambition drove him on. Having conquered Cabal, he crossed the Indus or to India. He had a very small army, but he had the new artillery, which was then being used in Europe and Western Asia. The huge Afghan host that went to fight him went to pieces before the little, well trained army and its artillery, and victory came to Babar. But his troubles were not over, and his fate hung in the balance many a time. Once, when grave danger threatened him, his generals advised him to retreat to the north. But he is made of sterner stuff and said that he preferred facing death to retreating. He, lo- he loved the wine cup. He decided, however, at this crisis in his life, to give up drinking, and he broke all his drinking cups. He happened to win, and he kept his pledge about wine. Barber was barely 4 years in India when he died. There were 4 years of fighting and little rest, and he remained a stranger to India and knew little about her. In Agra, he laid out a splendid capital and sent to Constantinople for a famous architect. Those were the days when Suleiman the Magnificent was building in Constantinople. Sinan was a famous Ottoman architect, and he sent his favourite pupil, Yusuf, to India. Barber wrote his memoirs, and this delightful book gives intimate glimpses of the man. He tells us of his Hindustan and of its animals and flowers and trees and fruits, not forgetting the frogs. He sighs for the melons and grapes and flowers of his native country, and he expresses his extreme disappointment at the people. According to him, they have not a single good point in their favour. Perhaps he did not get to know them in his 4 years of war. And the more cultural class is kept away from the new conqueror, perhaps also a newcomer does not easily enter into life the culture of another people. Anyway, he found nothing that was admirable, either in the Afghans who had been the ruling classes for some time, or in the majority of the people. He is a good observer and, even allowing for the partiality of a newcomer, his account shows that northern India was in a poor way at the time. He did not visit South India at all. The Empire of Hindustan, Barber tells us, is expensive, populous, and rich on the east, the south, and even the west. It is bounded by the Great Ocean on the north of Kabul, Ghazni, and Kandahar, the capital of Hinduism in Delhi. It is interesting to note that the whole of India was looked upon as a unit of Babur, although when he came it was split up into many kingdoms. The idea of this unity of India has persisted throughout history. Barber goes on with his description of India. It is a remarkably fine country. It is quite a different world compared with other countries, our countries, its hills and rivers, its forests and plains, its animals and plants, its inhabitants and their language, its winds and rains are all of a different nature. You have no sooner passed seen that the country, the trees, the stones, the wandering tribes, the manners and customs of the people are all entirely those of Hindustan. Even the reptiles are different. The frogs of Hindustan are worthy of notice. They are the same species as our own, yet they will run 6 or 7 gads on the face of the water. He then gives lists of animals, flowers, trees, and fruits, and Hindustan. And then we come to the people. Just bear with me 2 seconds. The country of Hindustan has few pleasures to recommend. The people are not handsome. They have no idea of the charms of friendly society. or of frankly mixing together, or of familiar intercourse. They have no genius, no comprehension of mind, no politeness of manner, no kindness or fellow feeling, no ingenuity or mechanical intervention in planning or exalting their handcraft works, no skill or planning or executing their handcraft works, nor skill or knowledge in design or architecture. They have no good horses, no good flesh, no grapes and musk melons, no good fruits, no ice or cold water, no good food or bread in their bazaars, no baths or colleagues, no candles, no torches, not a candlesticks. What have they got? One is tempted to ask. Barber must have been thoroughly fed up when he wrote this. The chief excellence of Hindustan, says Babar, is that it is a large country and has abundance of gold and silver. Another convenience of Hindustan is that the workmen of every profession and trade are innumerable and without end. For any work and any employment, there is always a set ready to whom the same employment and trade have descended from father to son for ages. I have quoted at some length for these memoirs of Babar. Such books often give us a better idea of a man than any description of him. Barber died 1530. When he's 40 years of age, there is a well known story concerning his death. Humayun, his son, was ill, and Babar, in his love for him, is said to have offered his own life if his son got well. It is said that Humayun recovered at Babar, died within a few days of this incident. They carried Babar's body to Kabul, and they were buried it in a garden he loved. He had gone back at last to the flowers he longed for. Babar conquered a great part of northern India by his generalship and military efficiency. He had defeated the Afghan Sultan of Delhi and later, and this was more difficult to ask. The Rajput cleaned under the leadership of the gallant Ragnar Sangha of Chittor, a famous hero in Rajput history, but he left a difficult task for his son, Humayun. Humayun was a cultured and learned person, but no soldier like his father. He had travelled all over his new empire, and ultimately in 1540, 10 years after his Babar's death, an Afghan chief in Bahia named Sher Khan defeated and drove him out of India. So the second of the great Mughals become a wanderer, hiding himself and suffering all manner of privations. It was during these wanderings in a Rajputana desert that his wife gave birth to a son in November 1542. This son, born in the desert, was to become Akbar. Humayun escaped to Persia, and Shah Tamas, the ruler of the place, gave him shelter. Meanwhile, Sher Khan was supreme in northern India, and for 5 years he ruled as Sher Shah. Even during this brief period, he showed that he was a very capable person. He was a brilliant organizer, and his government was active and efficient. In the midst of his wars, he found time to start a new and a better land revenue system for assessing taxes on the cultivators. He was a stern and hard man, but of all the Afghan rulers of India, and of many others also, he was certainly the ablest and best, but as often happens was efficient autocrats. He was all in his government, and with his death, the whole structure went to pieces. Humayun took advantage of this disorganisation and returned from Persia in 1556 with an army. He won, and after an interval of 16 years, he was again on the throne of Delhi. But not for long. 6 months later, he fell down a staircase and died. It is interesting to contrast the tombs of Muslims of Sher Shah and Humayun. The Afghan's tomb is Shahrazam, Empire, a stern, strong, imperious-looking building like the man. Humayun's tomb is at Delhi. It is a polished and elegant building, and from these structures of stone, one can form a good idea of these two rivals for empire in the 16th century. Akbar was only 13 years old then, like his grandfather. He came to the throne early. He had a guardian and protector, Behram Khan. The Khan Baba, he was called. But within 4 years, Akbar wearied of guardianship and other people's direction and took the government into his own hands. For nearly 50 years, Akbar ruled India. From early 1556 to the end of 1605, this was the period of the Revolute, of the Netherlands in Europe, and of Shakespeare in England. Akbar's name stands out in Indian history, and sometimes, and in some ways, he reminds one of Ashoka. It is a strange thing that a Buddhist empire of India of the 3rd century before Christ and Muslim empire of India of the 16th century after Christ should speak in the same manner and almost in the same voice. One wonders if this is not perhaps the voice of India herself speaking through two of her great sons. Of Ashoka, we know little enough, except what he has himself left carved in stone. Of Akbar, we know a great deal. Two contemporary historians of the court have, we know a great deal. Two contemporaries of the great court have left long accounts, and the foreigners who visited him, and especially as Jesuits who tried hard to convert him to Christianity, have written at length. He was the third in line from Babar, but the Mughals was still new to the country. They were regarded as foreigners to their and their whole was military. It was Akbar's reign that established the Mughal destiny and made it off the soil and wholly Indian in outlook. It was in his reign that the little great Mughal come to be used in Europe. He was very autocratic and had under control power. These seem to have been no whisper in India. Then of checking the ruler's powers as it happened, Akbar was a wise despot and he worked hard for the welfare of the Indian people. In a sense, he might be considered to be the father of Indian nationalism at a time when there was little of nationality in the country and religion was the dividing factor. Akbar deliberately placed the ideal of the common Indian nationhood above the claims of the separatist religion. He did not wholly succeed in his attempt, but it is amazing how far he did go and what great success attended his efforts. And yet Akbar's success, such as it was not due entirely to his unaided self. No man can succeed in great tasks unless the time is ripe and the atmosphere is favourable. A great man often forces at the pace and creates his own atmosphere, but the great man himself is a product of the times and of prevailing atmosphere. So Akbar also was a product of the time of India. In previous letter, I told you how silent forces in India work for the synthesis of the two cultures and religions that had been thrown together in this country. I told you of new styles of architecture and of the growth of the Indian languages and especially Urdu or Hindustani. And I also told you of the reformers and religious leaders like Ramananda and Kabir and Guru Nanak, who sought to bring Islam and Hinduism nearer to each other by saying stress of the common features and attacking their rites and ceremonials. This spirit of synthesis was abroad, and Akbar, with his finely sensitive and receptive mind, must have absorbed it and reacted to it greatly. Indeed, he became its chief exponent. Even a statesman he must have come to the conclusion that his strength and the nation's strength would lie in this synthesis. He was a brave enough fighter and able general. He was, unlike Ashoka, never averse to fighting, but he preferred the gains of affection to the gains of the sword, and he knew that they would be more enduring. So he set himself out deliberately to win the goodwill of the Hindu nobles and the Hindu masses. He abolished the jizya poll tax on non-Muslims and the tax on Hindu pilgrims. He made himself a girl of a noble Rajput family. Later, he married his son to a Rajput girl also, and he encouraged such mixed marriages. He appointed the highest posts in the empire several of his bravest generals and most capable ministers and governors were Hindus. Bajaman Singh was even sent for while as governor to Kabul. Indeed, in his attempts to conciliate the Rajputs and the Hindu masses, he went to such lengths that he was occasionally unjust to his Muslim subjects. He succeeded, however, in winning the goodwill of the Hindus, and the Rajputs flocked to serve him and do him honour. Nearly all except one unbending figure, Rana Pratap Singh of Mura. Rana Pratap refused to acknowledge Akbar's suzerainty, even nominally beaten in battle. He preferred to live a hunted life in the jungle to pampered ease as Akbar's vassal all his life. This proud Rajput fought the great empire of Delhi and refused to bow down to him. Towards the end of his days, he even met some success. The memory of his gallant Rajput is treasured in Rajputna, and many a legend has grown round his name. So Akbar won over the Rajputs and became very popular with the masses. He was indulgent to the Parsis and even to the Jesuit missionaries who came to his court. But this indulgence and a certain disregard of Muslim observances made him unpopular with the Muslim nobles, and there were several revolutes against him. I've compared him to Ashoka, but do not be misled by his comparison. In many ways, he was unlike him. He was very ambitious, and to the end of his days, he was a conqueror, intent on extending his empire. The Jesuits tell us that he possessed an alert and discerning mind. He was a man of sound judgment, prudent in affairs, and above all, kind, affable, and generous. With these qualities, he combined the courage of those who undertake and carry out great enterprises. He was interested in and curious to learn about many things, and possessed an intimate knowledge not only of military and political matters, but of many of the mechanical arts. The light of elemency and and mildness shone forth from this prince, even upon those who offended against his own person. He seldom lost his temper. If he did so, he fell into a violent passion, but his wrath was never long of duration. Remember, this description is not by a courtier, but by a stranger from another land who had plenty of opportunities to observe Akbar. Physically, Akbar was extraordinarily strong and active, and he loved nothing better than hunting wild and dangerous animals. As a soldier, he was brave to the point of recklessness. His amazing energy can be judged from a famous march of his from Agra to Ahmedabad. In 9 days, a revolt had broken out in Gujarat, and Akbar rushed with a little army across the desert of Rajputna, a distance of 450 miles. It was an extraordinary feature. There were no railways or motor cars then. I hardly reminded you. But great men have something besides all these qualities. They have, it is said, a magnetism which draws people to him. Akbar had his personal magnetism, and charm in abundant measure. His compelling eyes were in a wonderful description of the Jesuits, vibrant like the sea in sunshine. Is it any wonder that this man should fascinate us still, and that his most royal and many figure should tower above the crowds of men who have been but kings? As a conqueror, Akbar triumphed all over North India, and even the south, he added, Gujarat, Bengal, Orissa, Kashmir, and Sindh to his empire. He was victorious in central India and South India, also, and took tribute. His defeat of Rani Tukavati, a ruler in the central province, does him little credit. The Rani was a brave and good ruler, and she did him no harm. But ambition and desire for the empire cared little for such obstacles. In South India, his armies fought another woman ruler, the famous Chand Bibi, regent of Ahmednagar. The lady, this lady had courage and ability, and the fight she put up impressed the Mughal army so much that they granted her a favourable peace. Unfortunately, she was killed later by some discontented soldiers of her own. Akbar's armies also laid siege to Chittor. This was before Rana Pratap's time. Chittor was defeated very gallantly by Jamal. On his death, there was their terrible Jahar ceremony again, and Chittor fell. Akbar managed to gather round himself many efficient lieutenants who were devoted to him. Chief among these were two brothers, Fazi and Abel Fazl and Babel, about whom innumerable stories are still told. Today, Mal was his finance minister. It was who he revised the whole revenue system. In those days, you may be interested to know, there was no zamindari system and no zamindars of or talukdars. Local leaders, estates settled the land with the individual cultivators or riots peasants. It was what is called now the riot system, present day zamindars, and the creation of the British. Raja Man Singh and Japa was one of the Akbar's best generals. Another famous person in Akbar's court was Tansen, the great singer who has become the patron saint of all singers in India. Akbar's capital was an Agra to begin with, and he built the fort there. Then he built a new city at Fatehpur Sikri, which is about 15 miles from Agra. Who chose this site as a saintly person? Saki Salim Chisti lived there. Here he built a splendid city, much greater than London, according to an English traveller of the day, and for over 15 years. This was the capital of the empire. Later he made Lahore his capital. His Majesty, says Abul Fazl, the friend and minister of Akbar, plans splendid uh, edif- edifices and dresses the work of his mind and heart in a garment of stone and clay. Fatehpur Sikri still stands with its beautiful mosque and many other fine buildings. It is a deserted city and there is no life in it, but through its streets and across its wide courts, the ghost of the dead empire still seem to pass. Our present city of Allahabad was also founded by Akbar, but of course the site is a most ancient one, and Prayaga has flourished there since the days of Ramayana. The fort of Allahabad was built by Akbar. It must have been a busy life of conquest and con- con- cons- uh, consolidation of a vast empire, but right through it, one can see another of Akbar's remarkable traits. This was his boundless curiosity and his search for truth. Whoever could throw light on any object was sent for a question for unquestioned. The men of different religions gathered round him in the Ibadat Khana, each hoping to convert this mighty monarch. They often quarrelled with each other, and Akbar sat by listening to their arguments and putting many questions to them. He seems to have been convinced that truth was no monopoly of any religion or sect, and he proclaimed that his avowed principle was one of universal toleration in religion. A historian of his reign, Banduni, who must have participated in many of these gatherings himself, gives an interesting account of Akbar, which I shall quote. Banduni himself was an Orthodox Muslim, and he thoroughly disapproved on these activities of Akbar. His Majesty, he says, collected the opinions of everyone, especially of such as were not Muslim, retaining whatever he approved of, and rejecting everything which was against his disposition and ran counter to his wishes, from his earliest childhood to his manhood, and from his manhood to his old age. His Majesty has passed through the most various phases, and through all sorts of religious practice and sectarian beliefs, and has collected everything which people can find in books, with a talent of selection peculiar to him, and a spirit of inquiry opposed to every Islamic principle. Thus, a faith based on some elementary principles traced itself on the mirror of his heart. And as a result of all the influences brought to bear on his Majesty, there grew gradually, as the outline on the stone, the conviction in his heart that there were sensible men in all religions, and abstemious thinkers, and men endowed with miracle powers among all nations. If some true knowledge was thus everywhere to be found, why should truth be confined to one religion? At this time, you remember, there was a most extraordinary intolerance in Europe in the matters of religion. The Inquisition flourished in Spain and Netherlands and elsewhere, and both Catholic and Calvinists, no tolerance, and the other, a deadly sin. Yet after year Akbar continued his religious talk and arguments with the professors of all faiths, till the professor got rather tired of it and gave up hope of converting them to their particular faith. When each faith had something of truth, he could fix upon one. For the Gentiles, he is reported by to his Jesuits to have remarked, regard their law as good. And so likewise do the Saracens and the Christians, to which then shall we give adherence. By the Gentiles and Jesuits meant the Hindus, and the Saracens referred, of course, to the Muslims. The Jesuits' father, being Portuguese, knew the Saracens of Spain, and called the Indian Muslims by the same name. Akbar's question was a very pertinent one, but it annoyed the Jesuits, who say in their book that thus we see in the print of common fault over the atheist, refuses to make reason subservient to faith, and accepting nothing as true, which his feeble mind unable to fathom, is content to submit to his own imperfect judgment matters, transcending the highest limits of human understanding. If this is the definition of an atheist, the more we have of them, the better.